Of prayer and meditation. After our spoken meditation and a time of silence, we will sing together hymn number 123, Spirit of Life, which you can also find in your order of service. We'll sing it first in English and then in Spanish. Our meditation this morning is by Heather Januels. Our prophets died for the freedom of faith. We are here in their spirit. We are here to practice and sustain our living tradition, to light a chalice claiming for justice the heat and power of fire. In our free faith, we are here seeking freedom from despair, the freedom to be loved as ourselves, and the freedom to grow beyond imagination. We are here, gathered in the name of all that we find holy. Let us give thanks for the gift of gathering together here. Amen. Our reading this morning is by Denise Levertov. From too much love of living, hope and desire set free, even the weariest river winds somewhere to the sea. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy, only begun to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower, not as oppressors. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Surely it cannot drag in the silt all that is innocent. Not yet. Not yet. There is too much broken that must be mended. Too much hurt we have done to each other that cannot yet be forgiven. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. Tomorrow we celebrate the 4th of July, American independence, freedom. It feels good to celebrate freedom. The 4th of July is the one time of the year where I jump wholeheartedly into patriotism, American pride, and town spirit. I wear red, white, and blue. I proudly wave the little flags everyone gives out. I gleefully watch the fireworks, and I don't even think very much about how much they cost and how much good we could do with the money if we used it in another way. I even mustered up enthusiasm to wave to Scott Brown as he marched in my hometown 4th of July parade a few years ago. I am patriotic on the 4th of July. And I tear up at the patriotic songs, the songs about freedom. I always do. Even at the drive-in movies, when we sing the national anthem, I get choked up. You guys are so good earlier. Join me in a couple of lines, will you? Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. this one. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. Oh, you're good. I hope that you all have a safe and fun 4th of July tomorrow. Enjoy the parades and the fireworks, the barbecues and the time with family and friends. Enjoy commemorating the adoption of the Declaration of Independence on that fateful day of July 4th, 1776, on the day the Continental Congress declared that the 13 American colonies regarded themselves now as a new nation, the United States of America, and no longer part of the British Empire, the original Brexit. Freedom has always been an important value in this country, however imperfectly executed. European settlers came here seeking freedom from religious persecution. They embraced their freedom and then promptly denied it to others, but nevertheless it remains a founding principle. The Revolutionary War and the Declaration of Independence were a strong stand for freedom. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights codify freedoms, and since we keep widening our version of who deserves freedom and from what, we have modified that as needed. We talk about our freedoms as rights. We have the right to bear arms, the right to vote, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When our eyes were opened to the hypocrisy of being a country founded on freedom while simultaneously keeping our brothers and sisters enslaved, we fought for freedom from the bonds of slavery, and later freedom from the inequality of segregation. We pride ourselves on freedom of speech and a free press. We fought hard for the freedom to marry who we choose to marry. We are currently working on the freedom to use the bathroom that is most comfortable to us. My own contract as your minister outlines my freedom of the pulpit. That means that I get to say what I want to up here. So today, I want to say that we hold our freedoms dearly, and they are the backbone of our democratic society. Freedom is to be celebrated. Let freedom ring. But I also want to say that although we hold up freedom as a golden value, and although I hold the ideal of freedom as a dear one, it is not the value that I hold most dear all of the time. There are other ideals that I sometimes hold at least equal to freedom and sometimes higher than freedom. And in our zest for protecting our freedoms, whatever they may be, I don't want to lose sight of this nuance in the discussion. I hope that we can weigh our freedoms in each situation against the other values that we also hold dear. This morning I'll give a few examples of times when we might need to weigh the value of freedom. And I'll start with a sort of low stakes one, and we'll move on from there, so stick with me. I've spent a great deal of time with children, and although I'm no Nanny 911, I have learned a lot about what works with various age groups and in different circumstances. At times, freedom is a virtue in child rearing. Studies show that children who are left to play on their own, to create games from their own imagination, and to sort out squabbles with siblings and friends are better equipped later in life to make good use of their time, be inventive, solve problems, and relate to others. They are more independent and less fearful. This freedom growing up allows them time and opportunity to strengthen their skills, especially their interpersonal skills. But freedom can also be paralyzing for a child and can make parents slaves to their children's whims. Exercising their freedoms can put children in danger and create some really hard to deal with children when no limits are imposed. I think of the young child, 3 or 4 years old, getting dressed in the morning. Now, the liberal parent wants to allow the child to be in charge of their own dress. Let them have agency, they say, and I agree to a point. But here is my approach to getting a child dressed. Let's get some pants on. Would you like to wear the red pair or the blue pair today? 2 choices. The child still has agency, the freedom of choice, but the adult saves some time, remains in charge, and avoids the catastrophic meltdown of a child faced with too many choices. But moving right on to some higher stakes freedom issues. We have the right to bear arms in this country, but I simply do not understand why gun safety measures are swiftly shot down by people so fixated on this freedom that they cannot consider the other values involved. I don't understand, because if I am asked to weigh the freedom to bear arms against the safety of our children or the right to gather safely in public, I choose safety. I value freedom. But in the face of certain threats, I value safety more. Another, for instance, we have the right to freedom of the press. But another value that sometimes comes into conflict with that one is privacy. Sometimes I value privacy over freedom of the press, especially when press is defined loosely. Think paparazzi. This could never happen today in the age of Twitter and camera phones and a 24-hour news cycle, but I think about Franklin Roosevelt and how reporters almost never photographed FDR in his wheelchair. There was a respect involved. Of course there was freedom of the press, but they valued respect more than the freedom to expose a leader. Now let's take some of those values that we hold dear in a different combination and see what happens. Let's weigh privacy against safety. What about when the government wants to record our conversations or track our movements? Or when police want to use video surveillance to catch criminals, which means that even when we are not committing a crime, we are being caught on tape. It's complicated, isn't it? There's no simple hierarchy of values. When faced with these scenarios, when values we hold come into conflict with one another, we have to think carefully about them. Consider our priorities. Our values may shift over time, or based on experiences we've had, or when we become responsible for a life other than our own. We think of values being entrenched, but they're actually very fluid. This is true both as individuals and as a collective society. In a poll taken in 2001, before the attacks on the World Trade Center, only 33% of American respondents thought it appropriate to give up some of their liberties for the sake of protection. Right after the 9/11 attacks, 71% of Americans polled responded that they'd be willing to trade some freedom if it would help the U.S. government to reduce the threat of terrorism. But after the Boston Marathon bombings, the same poll showed only 43% of responders held that view. As individuals and as a society, we are always assessing and reassessing the value of freedom. We are lucky enough to enjoy free speech in this country. But again, do I value someone's right to spew hateful language more than I value decency and respect of others? Although it may not be a conscious thing, every day we are doing a cost-benefit analysis of our values and shuffling their order, depending on which one seems most important in the given moment. We value freedom of speech, of course, and we each have freedom to express what we are thinking. But if we do not, of our own accord, curtail our freedom of speech, that is, if we say everything we are thinking, which is our right, that blatant honesty and lack of social filter comes at the cost of offending those around us. Think about the question, do I look good in this dress? Only a fool exercises their freedom of speech to say the first thing that comes into mind when faced with that question. Instead, we value the feelings of the other person over our freedom of expression, and so we say something like, yes. Or, I like the blue one on you better. In our everyday lives, we negotiate the value of freedom all the time, not just by curtailing our speech, but also in other choices we make. Those of us who live with our partners give up the freedom to choose what we want to eat every night for dinner because we value companionship over this freedom. Those of us who drive in cars give up the freedom of going as fast as we want to because we value safety over that freedom. And so we obey the speed limits put in place for our own good. We often give up or at least trim freedoms in a quest for a better, safer, and more just society. And that is how it should be. Consider this story by Jabari Jones, a black man living in Maine. On a spring day in Farmington, Maine, he says, I was walking to Rennie's department store. I made my way through a line of cars that were waiting for the light, and in front of me was a large Confederate flag flying from the back of a white pickup. I crossed the street, not looking at who was driving the truck, and went into the store. As I went about my business, I felt stunned, my mind stirred with thoughts and feelings, memories and speculations. I felt fear and anger and curiosity, worry and defiance and humiliation. As I stood at the register, I chatted with the older white woman behind the counter. Hi, how are you today? I'm good, how are you? She replied. I paused, and then I told her about the truck with the flag. She said something like, oh yes, we have some of that around here, but don't let it upset you. Don't let it get to you. I appreciated her gesture, says Jones, her attempt to comfort me. At the same time, her gesture made me more uncomfortable. She was asking me to respect that person's right to fly that flag and shrug it off like everybody else. What she failed to see, or perhaps ignore in a gesture of color blindness wrapped in the First Amendment, is that I am not like everybody else who walks in the shadow of that flag. I am from away, as they say in Maine. My hair is coarse, my skin is dark brown. I am a black man in Maine. In so many ways, I am not like everybody else around here, but I want to belong here. In so many ways, that flag represents the denial of my rights, my belonging. We are granted the freedom to have a Confederate flag on the backs of our trucks, but that doesn't mean we should exercise that freedom. In an essay entitled The Cost of Freedom, Michael Rivero writes, so let us start out by defining a free society not as a society where people are free to do whatever they wish, but as one in which we freely choose to surrender certain behaviors in exchange for the benefits of living within that society. A covenant exists between the rulers and the ruled, in which each freely agrees to follow a set of rules of behavior in exchange for a certain set of rights. In the United States, that covenant is enshrined in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, a contract which lays out what the government may or may not do. In a free society, Rivero writes, the covenant must be enforced on both the rulers and the ruled equally. To enforce the covenant on the people, there is law enforcement, and when needed, prison. To enforce the covenant on the side of the government, the Founding Fathers created a government of 3 components, each charged with keeping an eye on the other 2, and when needed, to legally restrain excess of authority. So yes, we are a country founded on freedom, but from the very start, freedom was a dance, a give and take, a covenant with one another. Truthfully speaking, I am infuriated by the argument of those who say that we cannot create any meaningful gun control in this country because of our right to bear arms. By those who value the freedom to own a semi-automatic assault weapon over the safety of the children in our schools, or innocent movie theater goers, or people at a club celebrating gay pride. If we see freedom as a black and white issue rather than a spectrum of gray, where we give up some freedom to honor other values, then our debate can have no nuance at all, and it is costing us lives. We are out of covenant with one another. One way of restoring that promise of society is to be more reflective and less reactive when it comes to the values that we hold. And I include myself in the need to be better at dialogue around this. To recognize that freedom is actually a word very much on the move, always in flux, meaning different things to different people at different times. And when we can talk with one another openly about what freedom means to us and what freedoms we are willing to give up on behalf of society and what freedoms we are willing to fight for, then we are heading in the right direction. May that be part of our reflection tomorrow as we celebrate freedom. Amen, and blessed be.